My name is Angie Goodman, and living in Seattle, I have witnessed many different protests and riots. Some of the biggest ones were on the May Day celebration. But I was always taught growing up that May Day was a celebration of spring, a happy time. You'd leave flowers on doorsteps, that kind of thing. So what did the two have to do with one another? Today, I will explain how May Day celebration went to a happy occasion to the massacre of unionizers in Chicago to a communist and socialist major parade day. An article on CNN.com states that May Day started before Christ. It was an ancient pagan holiday that many different countries celebrated, especially the Druids in Britain. They would build these huge fires, and the smoke from the fires, they believed, purified things. So they would bring their families and their animals and their livestock, and they would walk them through the smoke to purify them. And they also believed that the fire helped build the sun, the springtime sun. And it was also a big deal in Rome. The Romans would have a huge 5-day celebration and feast worshiping the goddess of flowers, Flora. The women would have these elaborate flower headdresses, and they would have maypoles, and they would tie ribbons to these poles and dance around them. They would also leave flowers on people's doorsteps. But in the U.S., after the May Day massacre at the Haymarket Square in Chicago, this took on a different meaning. It began in the 1860s. Working class people started to fight for shorter work days. They wanted 8-hour work days without taking a cut in pay. They wanted safer working environments. They wanted Saturdays to be part of the weekend. And the unions started to build. They were getting new members. The unions were working together. One of the biggest unionizers of the time was Samuel Gompers, and he was leading the oldest union in the U.S., which is called the American Federation of Labor. This is according to the Labor History Journal. 1,000 men, women, and children died every year in the workplace. And the life expectancy in a lot of the different industries were 20 years old, the early 20s. The American Federation of Labor first national convention was held in 1884 in Chicago, and they held them every year after that. The first one, 250,000 people participated. That's nearly half the population of Chicago at that time, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. And in a report from the Industrial Workers of the World on May 1st, 1886, more than 300,000 workers in 13,000 businesses across the United States went out on strike. This is the first May Day celebration that we had. And 40,000 workers alone in Chicago went out on strike. And over the next several days, that number increased to over 100,000 workers. And the Pinkerton agents and police officers had been harassing all of these unions and strikers and protesters, and they would beat them, and eventually they killed 2 ironworkers that were on strike. So they got everybody together, held this big speech, and during the speech the police went to break it up, and somebody threw a bomb at the police. So they just started shooting, and 7 to 8 people were killed, members of the union, and 40 more were injured. And 7 to 8 police officers ended up dying. The first was on that day, and then 7 or 8 died in the week after that. But they figured that the majority of that was from friendly fire. They just shot wherever and killed themselves. And after that, they arrested 8 of the major unionizers and activists that they convicted and hung 4, with another one committing suicide in jail, and the 3 more were eventually pardoned 6 years later when a new governor took over. And after this riot, many different countries took on our May Day celebration. And many of these countries were communist, socialist, and they were doing it more to try to control their workforce. They wanted to get everybody to build a better communist and socialist country. And according to Will Jasper's History of May Day, it's still a huge celebration day in these countries like China, Vietnam, Cuba. They have their military comes out, they have missiles, and huge Marxist and communist flags are being waved. And the celebration of May Day has changed over the years, but it has an especially significant and poignant meaning in the United States. It is our forgotten holiday according to the Journal of History. People don't realize the true meaning of it. 8-year-old kids were out there fighting for these rights that we have today. They were injured in the workplace. Many women, men were fighting for all the rights that we all take for granted today. And that's why May Day is so important in the U.S.